a vehicle without a home army, a contender that never quite won, a machine built to match the best of NATO, waiting for a war it has never fought. To understand why the Tulpar existed, you need to understand the problem Turkey faced at the start of the 21st century. For decades, the Turkish land forces had fought and trained with other nations' hardware, American M48 and M60 tanks, thousands of American M113 carriers, German Leopard tanks bought second-hand, personnel carriers built under foreign license. Turkey had one of the largest armies in NATO, and almost none of the steel it rode into battle had been designed by Turkish hands. That dependence was a strategic weakness. A supplier nation can attach conditions, it can delay spare parts, it can refuse an upgrade or block an export, it can, in a moment of political anger, simply switch off the flow of ammunition and components that keep an army alive. Turkey had felt exactly that kind of pressure before. Arms embargoes, withheld deliveries, and political conditions had taught the country a bitter lesson across the decades. A weapon you do not control is a weapon someone else can take away from you. For a country sitting at the crossroads of Europe, the Middle East, and the Caucasus, surrounded by instability on almost every border, that was an intolerable vulnerability. Turkey shared frontiers or near frontiers with conflict after conflict. It needed an army it could arm on its own terms, resupply from its own factories, and upgrade without asking permission from anyone. So Turkey made a decision that would define its defense industry for a generation. It would stop being a customer. It would build its own. Out of that decision came a wave of indigenous programs, a national effort that would ripple across the entire globe. The Altay main battle tank, Turkey's first homegrown heavy armour, the Bayraktar drones that would later reshape battlefields from the mountains of Syria to the plains of Ukraine and turn the Turkish defence industry into a household name. Warships built in Turkish yards, missiles, radars, electronics, all pulled slowly back inside the country's own borders. The government set targets for local content that would eventually exceed 70 and even 80% in its flagship programs, chasing a dream of near total self-sufficiency in the machinery of war. And into that same rising current stepped a company called Otokar. Otokar was not a household name outside its own country, but inside Turkey it was an industrial giant. It was the largest privately owned defence firm in the nation, a subsidiary of Koç Holding, the sprawling conglomerate whose combined revenues equal nearly 8% of the entire Turkish economy. Otokar had begun in 1963 building the country's first intercity buses. By the 1990s it was building Turkey's first homegrown armoured cars, the Cobra and the Akrep, vehicles that would go on to serve in more than 40 nations. And crucially, Otokar had been chosen as the original prime contractor and designer of the Altay, Turkey's first national main battle tank. That is the key to everything that follows. The very same engineers who designed the Altay tank were the ones who designed the Tulpar, and they built it with a single vision in mind. A future Turkish armoured division would roll forward with Altay tanks at its spearhead and Tulpar fighting vehicles carrying the infantry alongside them. Two national machines, networked together, sharing the same electronics, the same protection philosophy, the same industrial bloodline, an all-Turkish armoured fist. There was just one thing missing from the plan. Nobody in the Turkish military had actually ordered it. Otokar started work on the Tulpar in 2011 as a private venture, betting company money that if it built something good enough the customers would come. The vehicle itself was a masterpiece of practical modular engineering. Start with the size, because size is where the Tulpar makes its first statement. Depending on how it is configured, the Tulpar's gross weight ranges from 28 tons all the way up to 45 tons. That is not a fixed number, and that is the entire point. The hull was designed from the beginning to be a modular platform. Bolt on more armour and it grows heavier and tougher. Strip it back for a lighter roll and it sheds weight. In its standard fighting vehicle form it sits around 32 tons, and even at that baseline it is heavier than the British Warrior and heavier than most versions of the American Bradley. The hull stretches 7.2 metres long and 3.45 metres wide. Ground clearance is 450 millimetres. Inside it carries a crew of 3, a driver, a commander and a gunner, plus up to 9 fully equipped infantry in the rear compartment. Those soldiers enter and leave through a powered ramp at the back, protected by steel until the last possible moment. At the front sits the engine, and here the modular thinking continues. Otokar designed the Tulpar to accept a range of power plants, anything from 700 to 1100 horsepower. The most commonly fitted engine was a Scania diesel, producing 810 horsepower. Later Turkey developed a national engine, the BMC Power Utku, producing a full 1,000 horsepower, cutting away yet another thread of foreign dependence. Whatever the choice, the result was a vehicle that could reach over 70 km an hour on a road and accelerate to 32 km an hour in around 6 seconds. Heavy metal that moved like something far lighter. The suspension was torsion bar with shock absorbers and an automatic track tensioning system, 7 dual road wheels aside, drive sprocket at the front, idler at the rear. It could cross a trench 2.6 metres wide. It could climb a vertical step of a full metre. It could ford water 1.5 metres deep. It could climb a 60% gradient and hold a 40% side slope. This was a machine built to follow a main battle tank anywhere that tank could go. Then there is protection, and this is where the Tulpar's ambitions become clear. Its armour is modular, layered composite plate that can be built up in stages. At its baseline, it meets NATO standard 4, 5, 6, 9 level 2. Fully armoured, it climbs to level 5, meaning it can stop a 25mm armour-piercing round striking its frontal arc. Underneath, the hull is shaped and hardened against mines and roadside bombs, tested to survive a blast the manufacturer rates at around 10 kilograms of TNT detonating beneath it. Inside, there is a nuclear, biological and chemical protection system, and an automatic fire suppression system that can smother an interior explosion in milliseconds, faster than a human being can even perceive the flames. And then there is the gun. The standard Tulpar carries the Otokar Mizrak 30 turret, an unmanned, remotely operated turret mounting a 30mm dual-feed autocannon firing standard NATO ammunition. Alongside it sits a coaxial 7.62mm machine gun. The commander and the gunner each have their own independent stabilized sights, with cooled thermal cameras, day cameras, and a laser rangefinder, allowing the vehicle to hunt and destroy targets on the move, day or night. The turret carries around 210 ready rounds of 30mm and can be fitted with guided anti-tank missiles, the Turkish UMTAS among them, giving it the reach to kill enemy tanks well beyond the range of its cannon. That is the fighting vehicle. But remember the word modular, because Otokar took that hull and built an entire family from it. Fit the same chassis with a larger turret and it becomes a light tank. At Eurocitry in 2018, Otokar showed a Tulpar mounting a Cockerel turret with a 105mm gun. At the World Defence Show in 2024, it revealed a version carrying an Italian Leonardo turret with a full 120mm cannon, the same caliber that arms a Leopard 2. Otokar's pitch was simple and striking. Here was a vehicle with the firepower of a main battle tank, but light enough to cross bridges a 60-ton tank would collapse, narrow enough for city streets a tank could never enter, nimble enough for forests and mountains where the heaviest armour bogs down. And then there was a separate, smaller cousin, the Tulpar S, first shown in 2015. Where the heavy Tulpar could not swim, the Tulpar S was fully amphibious with no preparation at all. It weighed up to 17 tons, ran on a 360 horsepower engine, carried up to 8 troops, and could paddle across a river at 7 kilometers an hour before climbing out the far bank and driving on. Same name, same family, entirely different mission. Every one of those numbers was chosen with a battlefield in mind. Think about what a modern infantry fighting vehicle is actually asked to do. It must carry a squad of soldiers directly into the storm, close enough to the fighting that they can dismount an assault, yet protected enough that they survive the approach. It must keep pace with the tanks it fights beside, matching their speed across broken ground so the armoured line does not tear apart. It must have eyes that see in the dark and a gun that kills at range, so it can suppress an enemy position while its infantry close the final distance on foot. And it must survive the things that hunt it. The mine buried in the road, the rocket fired from a window. The autocannon shell hammering its flank. Every specification in the Tulpar, the stabilized gun, the thermal sights, the modular armour, the blast-shaped hull, the automatic fire suppression, was an answer to one of those lethal demands. This was not a showpiece built for exhibition halls. It was engineered, bolt by bolt, for the worst day a soldier will ever have. Now, before we get into how this vehicle stacks up against the giants, it was built to challenge, and where in the world it has actually gone hunting for a home. If you are enjoying this deep dive into military engineering and the hidden stories behind the world's armoured vehicles, take a second to subscribe. It costs nothing. It takes one tap, and it genuinely helps this channel grow. So how does the Tulpa compare to the vehicles it was designed to match? Let us put it beside the two most famous Western fighting vehicles of the modern age, the British Warrior and the American Bradley. Start with the British Warrior. The Warrior entered service in the 1980s, a product of the Cold War, and for decades it was the backbone of British mechanised infantry. It weighs somewhere between 25 and 28 tons. It carries 3 crew and 7 infantry. It is powered by a 550 horsepower engine, and its main weapon is a 30mm cannon called the Raden. On the surface, the Warrior and the Tulpa look like near equals. Both are tracked, both carry a 30mm gun, but look closer and the years between them show. The Warrior's Raden cannon is an older design, manually fed, and it is not stabilised, which means the Warrior cannot fire its main gun accurately while moving. It must effectively stop to shoot. The Tulpa's Mizrak turret is fully stabilised, dual feed, with modern thermal sights, built from the ground up to fire on the move. The Tulpa carries 2 more infantrymen. It offers heavier, scalable modern armour. And where the Warrior's frame is decades old, the Tulpa is a 21st century design. The British themselves seem to admit the gap. In 2021, Britain cancelled the programme meant to modernise the Warrior, and chose instead to replace it with a wheeled vehicle, the Boxer, leaving the British Army without a modern tracked fighting vehicle at all. Some observers looked at that gap and wondered aloud whether a vehicle exactly like the Tulpa could one day fill it. Now, the American Bradley. The M2 Bradley is a legend, and unlike the Tulpa, it has earned that word in blood. It weighs around 30 to 33 tons in its modern form, close to the Tulpa. It carries 3 crew and 6 or 7 infantry. Its main gun is a 25mm cannon, a smaller caliber than the Tulpa's 30, though the Bradley pairs it with a proven twin launcher for Tau anti-tank missiles. On paper, the Tulpa has advantages: larger gun, more dismounts, more. A modular hull that can grow up to a 120mm cannon, something the Bradley was never designed to do. But the Bradley holds the one card the Tulpa has never been able to play. It has fought. The Bradley proved itself in the Gulf War in 1991, where it destroyed more Iraqi armoured vehicles than the mighty M1 Abrams tank did. It fought through the streets of Iraq. It has burned and bled and survived on the battlefields of Ukraine. Every weakness it had was found and fixed under real fire, and that is the shadow that follows the Tulpa everywhere. It is heavier than the Warrior. It outguns the Bradley. On paper it stands with the finest new generation fighting vehicles in the world. Consider the company it keeps. The Swedish CV-90, a superb tracked vehicle serving in army after army across Europe, refined over decades and battle-tested in Afghanistan. The German Puma, one of the most protected and most expensive infantry fighting vehicles ever built, packed with electronics and shielded to a standard few vehicles on Earth can match. The Rheinmetall Lynx, chosen by Hungary and courted by nations around the world. The Korean Redback. These are the true rivals, the peers the Tulpa was measured against in tender after tender. And on the raw figures, weight envelope, modularity, firepower growth, the ability to swap turrets and rolls, the Tulpa holds its own against every single one of them. In some respects it exceeds them, and it almost always undercuts them on price. But paper is not war. The Tulpa has never fired a shot in anger. It has never taken a hit from an enemy who meant it. It has never had to prove under real fire that its armour holds, that its electronics keep working when a shell rings the hull like a bell, that its crews climb out alive. The CV-90 has done that. The Bradley has done that. The Puma stands ready in a frontline NATO army. Every rival that beats the Tulpa in a competition tends to beat it with the same single weapon. Combat experience and a track record of service that the Tulpa simply does not have. Which brings us to the strangest part of the whole story. Where has the Tulpa actually gone? For more than a decade, the answer at home was nowhere. The Turkish army, the very force the Tulpa was designed to serve, never placed an order. Turkey does have a requirement to replace its aging fleet of tracked carriers, a massive programme for thousands of new vehicles. And when that competition finally takes shape, the Tulpa is expected to face a domestic rival, the FNSS Kaplan, in a straight fight for the contract. But year after year, that decision was delayed. As late as 2026, no contract had been signed, and both companies, when asked, declined to comment, a silence that spoke of little progress. Otokar's own general manager admitted with striking honesty in one interview that, in his words, right now there is no tender the company is bidding in, and that its offers were more in the form of sharing information than competing for a signed deal. So the Tulpar went abroad to find the home its own country would not give it. In Brazil, it was shortlisted for a new family of tracked armoured vehicles, standing against the CV-90, the Ascod and the Lynx. In late 2025, the commander of the Brazilian army travelled personally to visit Otokar. In Poland, it was offered for a heavy fighting vehicle competition, with the Poles interested in fitting their own domestic turret to a licensed Turkish hull. In Slovakia, the Tulpar's 120mm light tank version was shortlisted against a Swedish rival. The Slovak defence minister noted that both offered 40 to 50% cost savings compared to buying full main battle tanks, and could be fielded in as little as 3 to 4 years. Cost, always, was the Tulpar's sharpest weapon. In Bangladesh, there were reports of talks for more than 24 Tulpar light tanks. Latvia looked closely, and then chose a different vehicle. But the most concrete step of all came from Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, the Tulpar was put through the kind of trials that break weaker machines, firing tests to prove its gun, mobility runs across brutal, punishing terrain, high altitude where thin air starves an engine of power, wide temperature swings that expand and contract steel and crack seals, deep sand that swallows road wheels and choked filters, thick mud that grips tracks and drowns weaker drivetrains. The Kazakhs pushed the vehicle hard, exactly as a real war would, and they wrote down what it did. It passed. It was qualified in line with the Army's requirements, and on the 24th of December 2025, the President of Kazakhstan himself visited a defence plant and announced that a Tulpar-based light tank, carrying the Italian 120mm turret, would enter production there, beginning the following year. He called it not merely an industrial project, but a matter of national security and economic sovereignty. After more than a decade of searching, of exhibitions and handshakes and polite refusals, the winged horse had, at last, found somewhere it might truly be built. Behind all of this stood the company itself, and Otokar's story is a reminder that the Tulpar was never a failure of ability. This was a firm at the peak of its craft. In late 2024, Otokar signed a contract worth over €850 million with Romania for more than 1,000 of its Cobra armoured vehicles, the largest single armoured vehicle export deal in Turkish history. Under that deal, the first vehicles would be built in Turkey and the rest assembled in Romania itself, through a joint venture, the exact kind of generous technology transfer that made Turkish offers so hard for buyers to refuse. Its vehicles serve in over 40 countries, more than 33,000 of them by the company's own count. It built Turkey's first indigenous armoured cars. It was chosen to design the national main battle tank, the Altay, the very program that trained the engineers who would go on to create the Tulpar. And by the middle of the decade, that Altay tank had finally reached serial production in Turkey, rolling toward the army in real numbers at last. When Otokar's leaders declared, again and again, that the Tulpar was ready for serial production, they were not bluffing. The vehicle worked, the engineering was sound, the trials were passed. The company had proven over and over that it could build armour the world wanted to buy. The problem was never the machine. The problem was the paradox at the heart of the arms trade. Buyers want a vehicle that another army already trusts. They want to see it in someone else's service, absorbing the risk, finding the flaws, before they stake their own soldiers' lives on it. No defence minister wants to be the first name on the order, the one who gambles the national budget and the crews of the front line on a machine no other force has yet dared to field. But a vehicle whose own home army has never bought it carries an unspoken question everywhere it goes. If it is truly this good, buyers ask, then why has Turkey itself not fielded it? Why does the nation that built it still ride into battle in something else? It is a fair question, and it has no easy answer, and it has followed the Tulpar into every negotiating room it has ever entered. It is a chicken and egg trap. To win export orders, you need a reference customer. To become a reference customer, someone has to place the first order, and for over 10 years, nobody would. A superb vehicle with no army to call its own, waiting, always waiting, for the first buyer brave enough to be the one who proves it. So return now to that exhibition hall in Istanbul in 2013, where a heavy tracked vehicle rolled into the light for the very first time. A machine designed by the men who built a national tank. a hull that could carry anything from a 30mm cannon to a gun the size of a leopard's, armour that could be built up to stop autocannon fire. A family of vehicles, wheeled cousins and swimming cousins and light tank cousins, all born from a single clever design. Be honest about its flaws. It was never bought by the army it was built for. It has never fired a shot in a real war. It has never been hit, never been tested by an enemy who wanted its crew dead. It has leaned, for its most powerful versions, on foreign engines and foreign turrets. It has lost competition after competition to rivals whose only true advantage was that they had already been to war. And yet the Tulpar endured. Year after year it returned to the great arms fairs of the world, refined, improved, offered with terms and technology transfers that Western firms would never match. It outweighed the Warrior, it outgunned the Bradley, it forced its way onto the shortlists of Brazil and Poland and Slovakia. It passed the hard trials of Kazakhstan and at long last earned a production line of its own on foreign soil.